Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and it is still spooky season. Now, I am coming to you today with a not-so-late night double feature TBR. In the last half of October, I'm going to be participating in 2 readathons, both of which span those last 2 weeks. And those 2 readathons include Fortnight Frights and the Rocky Horror Readathon. Now, with some of these books, I do have some repeats from my first October TBR because that TBR was for the whole month, and so I incorporated some of the books that I haven't finished yet into these TBRs. I'm going to start off with Fortnight Frights, which was something that was put together by Seiji from the Artesian Geek. If you don't already follow her, what are you doing? Please go check her out. For Fortnight Frights, she put together a bingo sheet, and I have several things that are going to be fulfilling some of the prompts on there. The first book that I have for this fulfills that very first prompt of a book with an undead character, and that is going to be Immortal Love Stories with Bite by PC Cast. This was already featured on my first October TBR, where I talk about the fact that I don't actually have, expectations for this. If anything, I'm expecting it to be kind of silly, in the same way that a lot of early 2000s vampire YA is. So it just should be a lighter read for the month. This is an anthology of short stories, all surrounding around paranormal romance. It looks like a fair amount of them have sort of a diverse setting to a certain extent, so it'll be nice to see what, cheesy early 2000s vampire looked like outside of just the school setting. The next prompt is to read a book with a disabled character or by a disabled author. And for that, I'm going to be reading Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. Audre Lorde was a Black lesbian activist, and among the many things that she talked about, she also talked about being a cancer survivor, which makes this good for that prompt. So Sister Outsider would also cover the prompts for a book written by an LGBT author, a book written by a Black or African author, and a book with a green cover. The next prompt is to read a book written by a Latinx author, and for that I'm going to be reading, or at least starting, the Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Fiere. I'm not 100% sure what to expect with this book. I know pedagogy is like teaching style and stuff like that, and I have read a little bit of that, but I know that this is also looking at oppression, so maybe it's about how to use education to empower people. I'm not 100% sure, but I've heard tons of good things about this, and it's one that I've been really interested in looking at, even from, the very first time that I just heard the title. It was one that I really gravitated towards. So I'm hoping to start that at the end of this month. And then the next prompt that I'll be fulfilling is a short story. And in order to fulfill this, I'm actually just going to be reading an anthology, which, of course, Immortal could very well fit, but I also have Love Beyond Space and Time, edited by Hope Nicholson. This is an anthology of sci-fi from LGBT Indigenous writers. So this would also cover the prompts for a book written by an LGBT author. The next prompt I actually have 2 books for, and that is for the prompt to read a poem. And for that, I'm going to be reading Felon by Reginald Dwayne Betts. I have read some of Betts's other works before. I read Bastards of the Reagan Era, and I really, really enjoyed it. I've got a couple of things by him on my TBR, but I'd really like to get to Felon. The book that I would like to read alongside that is Punching the Air, which is a young adult book written in poetry form, so it fits the prompt, and this looks at the school to prison pipeline, and I think that it has a positive outlook, kind of utilizing art and things like that. This was actually written by one of the Exonerated 5, which were a group of boys that had a really high profile case that they were in where they were falsely accused of assault. Both Punching the Air and Felon are written by Black authors, so they would cover that prompt as well. The next prompt is to read a book written by an Asian author, and for that I'm going to be reading the first volume of Monstress. This is a fantasy comic book. It looks really interesting. This also fulfills the prompt of horror comic and dark fantasy as well. So these are what I'll be reading for Fortnight Frights. Now we can get on to part 2. Now for the Rocky Horror Readathon. There is also a bingo sheet for this, and all of these prompts are based off of the iconic cult classic Rocky Horror Picture Show. I'm going to start off with the books on my TBR that are a little bit more seasonally appropriate, and then I will move along to the ones that don't necessarily fit in with the campy, spooky feel. First, I have the Rocky Horror Picture Show comics, which I did not previously know existed, but there are 3 issues of this comic, and reading it will cover the prompts for Rose Tint My World, a theatrical book, and Tissa.
Say it. Say the damn word.
Which covers the prompt where you are supposed to start the book at the beginning of the readathon and then not finish it until the end. And then it also fits in with the prompt for Columbia, which is to read a fun book. Next, I have a book that I've already talked about once in this video, but that is Immortal by PC Cast, and that fits the prompt for Damn It, Janet, which is to read a book that you've been putting off. And I have owned this book since 2008 or 2009, so it's been a hot minute. It's not been one that's been on the top of my TBR by any means, but I've definitely been putting it off. Next, I have Universal Harvester by John Darnielle, which covers the prompt for The Criminologist, which is to read a thriller or a horror book. This is another one that I talked about in my first TBR, but this was written by John Darnielle, who is the lead singer of one of my most favorite bands, and also has a couple of other books, and I've read one of the other ones, and it was super interesting. So while the plotline kind of seems like a little bit stereotypical horror movie, I am thinking that he can probably do something interesting with it. So I'm excited for it. Next, I have a horror classic that could also fit in with The Criminologist, but that is Red Dragon. My goal was to read all the first 3 Hannibal Lecter books this month. It's just not going to happen. I kind of knew that it wasn't going to happen just because of the way that I read. But I'm still on Red Dragon and will probably still be on Red Dragon when the 18th comes around. If by some miracle I'm not, then I'll read Silence of the Lambs instead. But this also fits in with my free space, which I'm going to use for Buddy Read. The next pick is not spooky, but it is kind of campy or silly, but definitely tropey. But I absolutely adore it. It's going to be a reread of Roadqueen, Eternal Road Trip to Love, which is an enemies or rivals to lovers story, which features a kind of badass gay fuckboy who isn't necessarily interested in a solid relationship. She's just interested in her motorcycles. But when somebody kidnaps her beloved Bethany, that's the motorcycle's name, some fake dating ensues, and it is beautiful. But this covers several prompts, including Hot Patootie, which is to read a romance, Eddie, which is to read a book with a bad boy, and Columbia, which is to read a fun book, I'm Going Home, which is a comfort read, and gay graphic novels are definitely my comfort read, and then it fits Frankenfurter, which has LGBT rep. Next, we move into like sci-fi territory, which isn't strictly spooky, but it gives me more Halloween vibes. First, we have Love Beyond Space and Time, which I've already mentioned. Of course, this would cover Frankenfurter, which is an LGBT book, but it would also technically cover romance as well, since this is about love. Then I have An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green, which I also mentioned in my first October TBR, and this covers science fiction double feature, which is to read part of a duology. And then this also fits the Frankenfurter prompt for LGBT rep because the main character is bisexual. Then the rest of my TBR is not necessarily spooky, but they're still great reads and they still fit the prompts. First, we have Sister Outsider, which I've already discussed, but it also covers several things for this readathon, including Dr. Scott, which is to read something with disability representation, and Frankenfurter, which is to cover LGBT representation. Then I have When You Ask Me Where I'm Going, which I actually started last month and just never got around to finishing, so I plan on finishing it now. It is a poetry book, and it talks a whole lot about racism, beauty standards, and that sort of thing. I'm not 100% sure where the plot is going to go. I do know that it is supposed to be a work of fiction. But I'm having this cover riffraff, which is a sloppy or ugly cover. Now, the cover that is final, I like perfectly well. I think it's a really engaging and interesting cover. However, my copy is clearly a sloppy cover. This isn't even like a bad cover for a book that doesn't have a cover yet, but since it's the fake cover and since it has this ugly yellow thing on it, we'll say that it counts. Next, I have Stay Gold, which is a contemporary YA novel that focuses on a trans boy who has just transferred to a new school. He is stealth, so nobody really knows that he's trans, and he thinks that he can get through it just fine without anybody knowing, but then he starts to fall for a cheerleader. This covers, obviously, again, the prompt for Frankenfurter, LGBT rep. It would also cover Transsexual Transylvania, which is trans rep, Rocky, which is gold on the cover, and Magenta, which is a pink cover. And there's pink on that cover as well. The final book on my overly ambitious TBR for the second half of October is Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid. This covers 2 prompts. They are, of course, our iconic main characters, I suppose, if you don't count Frankenfurter, which I think you should. We have Brad,
Asshole.
which is to read a contemporary, and Janet,
Slut.
which is to read a popular book. So, I have just a few books to pick from. Will I read all of them? Probably not, but I'll have fun trying to get through as many as possible. If you are going to be participating in either of these readathons, let me know about the book that you are most excited to read in the comments below. If you're participating in any other October readathons, also let me know. There were so many cool things going on this month. It was really hard to limit the things that I was participating in. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.